Sue had managed to serve up the food and drinks all through her shift, and even did it with an oversized smile that she felt should have put people off. Normal people, anyhow. Mike the Dick and the customers themselves just seemed to eat it up, along with their burgers and fries. Her tips even ended up being larger than they usually were. Her real mood, that was stored in the pit of her stomach, actually seemed to be lightening up. All of that, however, changed at midnight. Midnight was when Michelle was supposed to usually meet her. It was her day off, but they still would come in sometimes toward the end of each other's shift for company when things were slow, and sometimes they'd sneak free sweets. At 12:30, Sue realized Michelle wouldn't show at all. She felt new brimming tears in her eyes. She didn't want to be at work anymore, but she sure as hell didn't want to go to her empty home. She turned her thoughts back to what Rob had said. She'd actually been able to put it on the back burner and put her relationship troubles up front. They seemed to need her more immediate attention. The job had also been a great source of distraction, along with her thoughts of how to patch things up with the girl she loved. She really did love her. She had planned on telling Michelle not to go home that night when she saw her, but it looked like she wouldn't be seeing her after all. She was on her way to pick up one of the dwindling orders for two at a table for four, when instead she bolted for the kitchen phone. Michelle and her had not seen the necessity of getting cell phones. They were much pricier than the landline. Neither of them really had anyone else to call them anyway. They could easily just call their answering machine and punch in the access code to retrieve any messages. Finally, they both just thought it would be too LA to have a cell phone. Michelle joked that she would get a cell phone after she started drinking Evian water instead of from the tap. Sue dialed her home number and got the machine on the fourth ring. "This is Sue," she heard herself say. "And Michelle," her girlfriend, who she truly feared had become her ex-girlfriend, said. "Leave a message after the beep," she heard herself finish. The machine beeped. "Michelle, are you there? If you're there, pick up." She pictured Michelle packing all of her things up and just rolling her eyes at her ex-lover's voice that was coming from the machine's little speaker. There was only dead air while Sue paused and waited. "Okay, I guess you're still out. Anyway, as soon as this message finishes playing, get out of there. I know it may sound weird, but Rob really thinks we're in immediate danger there. He called me. I already called the hotel we stayed at last time after, well, and reserved the same room. Come meet me there, please. Take a cab. I'll pay for it." She heard the phone pick up. "Michelle?" she said. The only sound on the other end was breathing. "Michelle?" She was frowning. Michelle didn't play games. She had never met anyone more straightforward in her life. "Michelle, answer me. I know you're there. I can hear you breathing." The breathing stopped. "Come on, Michelle. I'm sorry about earlier. I really am. I know I've been a total bitch." A loud click and then the dial tone interrupted her. Was Michelle so upset that she would hang up on her, she wondered? She didn't really think so. She dialed her number again and got a busy signal. She didn't know what to do. She had the feeling that Michelle was completely through with her. She didn't blame her for that, but she was suddenly filled with anger at the thought of Michelle playing junior high school phone games with her instead of just talking to her. Still, despite her wanting to run over there and throttle her for being so petty and immature, she trusted what Rob had said. She was going to do what he said. She would go to the hotel and hope that Michelle would come to her senses. She would check her messages, if Michelle put the phone back on the hook, tomorrow to see if she got a message from Rob saying that the coast was clear. "Back to work, Sue," Mike popped his head out of his office to say. She ignored him, but put the phone back on its cradle and got the 2 dinner orders. Michelle had no idea what to get for Sue. She was standing clueless in the aisle of the Save-On that was right down the road from their apartment. Sue wasn't exactly the flowers and chocolate kind of girl. Michelle didn't know if a cheesy apology gift would just end up being more insulting, but she wanted to get her something to show that her heart was in the right place. She decided against getting her a card. She would just say everything to Sue herself. After half an hour of deliberation, she decided to get something from each end of the spectrum. She found a silly little basket full of fake purple flowers with a heart-shaped plastic plaque that read sorry. There were others that read thank you and miss you and love you. She knew, or hoped she knew, that Sue would have to giggle at its hokey factor. It was only $5 and sort of made a point, a truth in the joke, so she got it. The other item she purchased was a $15 bottle of Jose Cuervo Especial tequila. She thought of saying something like, "It'll make dealing with an ass like me a little easier," or, "If you want, you can just break the bottle over my head," when she gave it to her. She hoped Sue would laugh or at least smile. Sue hadn't really smiled enough to show her beautiful teeth in so long, and Michelle hated herself for getting so mad at her for it. She also hoped that she and Sue would be able to sit down and maybe talk some stuff out over a couple of shots to help loosen things up. Michelle purchased the items with her check card. Her guilt told her that she had not bought enough and that they weren't even appropriate gifts, but at that hour it was the only store close by that was still open, so her choices were limited. She hoped she could make it up to her more at a later time. The cashier bagged her things, and then Michelle began to walk home. She hoped it was still her home. She had braced herself, in the back of her mind, just in case it was not anymore. During her stroll, she tried to think of how to talk to her when she came in. It was the worst time of day because Sue was always in a foul mood right after work for a bit, but Michelle couldn't just let the night go by. She didn't want to sleep on it. She finally came to the decision to just let it happen as it would happen. She took the elevator and got out her keys from her purse with her free hand. When she opened the apartment door, something felt wrong. All the lights were off. They always left the lamp closest to the door on so they could see when they got in. Then she realized that at least one light actually was on. It was the light in her bedroom. It was shining out from under the closed door into the dark living room. She had a quick, hopeful flash that Sue had not gone to work that night and was waiting for her in her room, in her lingerie, surrounded by rose petals on her comforter. She doubted it just as quickly. She set her things down on the dining table and turned the living room lamp on. She saw the phone was off the hook. She frowned at that and walked over to it. She felt her stomach flip-flop. She figured Sue had stayed home after all and had taken the phone off the hook to not get any calls from her. She must still have really been mad. It was a good thing she hadn't gone to meet her at work after all, because it would have been a wasted trip and further delay in either closure or a new beginning. She also hadn't wanted to go to the diner because she didn't feel comfortable with seeing her for the first time, after their first real fight, in a crowded restaurant that was also their place of employment. She didn't want anyone to witness Sue decapitating her, sending her head rolling down the service counter, no matter how much Michelle felt she might have deserved it. Maybe Sue just took the phone off the hook because she didn't want to be disturbed. Maybe she had a real bad headache. Maybe she missed Michelle and was sleeping in her room to feel close to her. Why hadn't she just turned down the ringer in the machine as they did every night before bed? Michelle put the phone back in its cradle. She saw that there were no messages on the answering machine. She suddenly wondered if Sue had a headache or was trying to be romantic, why she would keep that bright overhead light on. She had a dimmer lamp in there. It was time for her to stop feeling so trepidatious. She would let the eggshells crush loudly under her more confident feet. She walked over to her door and knocked on it. "Sue?" she called out with concern. When she got no response, she knocked again, harder. Still, there was no answer. She tried the knob. It turned easily under her hand. She let the door gently swing open. The room was empty. She stepped in and looked around. Everything was in place. Even the bed was still made. Then something caught her attention. She noticed her folding closet door was partly open, and the light had been left on in there too. She walked over to turn it off. She grabbed the door and slid it aside. She screamed in terror when she saw inside. He looked down at her and said, "Well, hello there, darlin'." Her scream stopped as he wrapped his large hand around her face and lifted her off the floor, her feet dangling, and pulled her into the closet with him. Traffic had been a nightmare. There was an accident that had shut down the freeway for at least a couple hours. Emergency vehicles couldn't even get through the jammed cars. All 4 lanes were bumper to bumper, but their sirens still blared away as if anyone was even capable of moving over. Rob wondered if anyone's life was at stake while the debacle was going on. The lanes eventually reopened, but no wreckage could be seen. There were only remnants, showing evidence that a wreck had occurred. There was some broken glass and various scraps of car parts that had been missed by the hurried emergency crew. The tires of Sue's car crunched easily over the remaining bits. Rob had not panicked. There was nothing he could do about it. Fate was playing a role, and things were going the way they were meant to. His complete lack of a choice to do anything but sit and wait made doing just that easier. After that, it was like he had been in perpetual rush hour. Rob was finally seeing signs indicating that he could soon get to the 101 freeway. He was glad to be so close at last, but he stayed over the speed limit, trying to keep ahead of his own sense of dread. He had no idea how long it had taken him to get back. He had taken Tony, the mechanic, up on his advice despite his hurry. He couldn't risk any more delays, especially ones he knew about up front. The auto parts store had replaced a solenoid for him and had given him an assurance that the car should run fine for some time. The clock in the car radio had died long before Sue had even met Rob. On his wrist, where a watch could have been, was the bracelet, which was more of a wristband, that graveyard Michelle, as he called her, had given him. The sun had set several hours before. He knew it was very late. He could feel that. Between the immensely exhausting drive and the lack of sleep, he was completely fried. He didn't know how he could possibly hope to stand up against a killer who seemed utterly invulnerable when he was at his best, let alone put up any kind of a fight in his current state. He noticed how slow his reflexes had become. He would pass a sign, read it, and several seconds later he would understand what it had said. He knew he could pull over and easily pass out and tap into what was going on in the killer's mind. However, his sense of foreboding would not allow him to stop. He trusted Sue and knew she would do as he had insisted, even if she didn't fully understand or believe him, and he knew she would make Michelle go along with it. Still, he needed to be there. He was the target, not them. He would not let their potential deaths be on his conscience. If only the fucker would just sleep. Then he could maybe see that Rob wasn't there anymore. He was on a path that would hopefully lead to the deadly bastard's own death. That should be enough incentive to forget about L.A. and go on up to Redding, where he had been headed. He realized that when he had last been inside that awfully demented headspace that the monster of a man was just too driven and too close to stop and sleep and find that Rob had already left. No, Rob would keep going because if Sue and Michelle got caught in the crossfire, they were as good as dead. Rob was beginning to get extremely frustrated at how long it was taking to get there. Hopefully the killer was also having his own set of delays. Rob's eyes wanted so badly to close. They were burning and reddened and too dry to even be able to tear up. Finally he reached the 101 exit. He was so close. He knew these last few miles would be the longest of the trip, not just because of the traffic, but also because of the anticipation. He got off the 101 and onto the Hollywood exit. The sight of the Capitol Records building further solidified just how close he was getting. He turned south on Kingston and found a parking space just a block north of Garfield. He wasn't the best at parallel parking, and it was a tight fit, but more because of the state he was in. He kept slamming into the bumpers of the cars in front of and behind him as he wedged himself in. As he had been driving those last few minutes of his journey, he observed the people on the Hollywood Strip. He watched the crowds just stumbling around in no particular hurry, blissfully unaware of the real evil that was out there in the world right then, some of it very close by. He envied them, on some level, and pitied their ignorance all at once. Could they possibly still look so casual if they knew just how dark a human soul could be, or if they knew of the very real monsters that could come for you in your sleep? He felt unfortunate that he would never be able to see things in that oblivious perspective. He would always feel that there were things, both unseen and sometimes clearly visible, in the shadows. At the numerous red lights that had held him up along the way, he began searching his own mind and his memories of his dreams for any possible weakness that could be found in the killer. He did not want or plan for it to be a kamikaze mission. He wanted to put a stop to that son of a bitch, for his own life, and for the many lives that would inevitably be ended as long as that bastard walked the earth. He knew, and felt, that no bullet or blade could kill him. Rob was no match for hand-to-hand combat, so what could he possibly use? He hoped the voice would answer by the time the moment came. In the meantime, he couldn't wait for it. Despite his lack of surety, he felt compelled to go on. He felt as if he was being pulled along, not entirely of his own will. He trusted in that instinct. As if slamming into the bumpers jogged his memory, he suddenly realized something. In the muddled madness, and through the arguing chorus of voices in the killer's head, he'd figured out two things. One was that the killer was just as tired, if not more so, than he was. Maybe Rob could find a way to take advantage of that. The other thing was that the killer was absolutely terrified deep down inside. It was not a fear that one would expect to find in someone on a hellish killing spree. There was no fear of getting caught, just concern about being mildly inconvenienced. It was not the kind of fear found in schoolyard bullies that deep down their own insecurities may take them over if they didn't beat them out of the other kids. It was a tangible, external fear. Something was causing it. That was all Rob knew. He tried to remember if he could understand the source of that feeling when he'd been inside the killer, but he had not been able to make out anything more specific of it. The killer's thoughts were too random and jumbled up. Rob had felt that fear along with the killer when he had been in that thick soup of lunacy, and at times it had felt downright debilitating. Rob knew there was a possible weapon in that. He just didn't know what it was or how to use it. Details, he sighed, and then let out a maniacal laugh after he got the car parked. If only he could just stop in the midst of what he was doing and take a nap, maybe more of an answer would come to him in the dream world. He laughed again at that thought, and said aloud, with a weakly humorous acceptance, "I must be losing my mind." His laughter died down, and he sighed again, deeply, bracing himself, and he got out of the car. That part of the journey had ended. He stared at the apartment building for a moment, somewhat disbelieving that he had already arrived, and then he took his first steps towards it. He watched the building get larger as he approached it. He still had the car keys in his hand. On the same ring was the key to the main door, and the key to Sue and Michelle's front door. He entered the lobby, climbed the stairs in a daze, and slowly slipped the key into the lock of their door. He turned it, and then let the door creak open.